Okay. It is 12:10, so I am going to get started. Welcome to Beyond Code, crafting effective discussions for technical decision making. So imagine this. You're sitting at your computer in a meeting, not very hard to imagine, and sure, you're paying attention, but you're also answering that quick Slack message. You're trying to write that easy bit of code, and then you're waiting for tests to pass. You're watching the presenter walk you through something. Any questions, they say? And you think, nope, no questions from me. Because of course, why would you have any questions? You were really only kind of paying attention, which is fine, right? You hope you didn't miss anything, but if you did, you'll review the pull request, you'll read the spec stock later. You can always comment on it when you've actually had a chance to give it some deeper thought. Now pause, switch roles, and think of the time that you've been the presenter, hoping that people are listening because you took the time and effort to prepare for this meeting. It's really important that everyone's aligned and on the same page. Any questions you ask? Whew, none. That means that what you talk through must be so clear and so well understood, and folks agree with it, so you're all set, right? Okay, now we've all been both of these people, and telling this story, I'm sure that you can see all of the holes. We often go into meetings, though, with these expectations and mindsets, because so many of the meetings that we're in are just not that good. So raise your hand. I got some three hand-raising questions. Raise your hand if you paid attention fully in the last meeting that you were in. Okay, all right, smattering. How about if you remained fully engaged in the last deeply technical meeting that you were in? Okay, a couple more. Okay, now raise your hand if you don't like meetings. It's like generally almost everyone. Great. And that's because, again, so many meetings suck. They don't feel valuable enough for us to give them our undivided attention amidst all of the additional things that we're trying to get done and that all the different things that we're trying to accomplish. Even if we know theoretically that they're valuable, even if we don't necessarily want them to come off of our calendar, we're still not fully there and giving them our undivided attention. I'm Allison McMillan. The best compliment that I ever got was that I run meetings like I hate meetings. And I think that so many of the times that we get together, meetings, gatherings, etc., are just not great because they just sort of happen. They're on the calendar, people show up, you're just there instead of actually being facilitated in thoughtful ways. So a little bit about me. I'm a fractional engineering executive. I also run workshops, trainings, and offsites for teams and companies, particularly those that have a lot of engineers or heavy on the engineering side. I previously worked at GitHub, where I ran code spaces, pull requests, and repositories. I was also the head of Eng at Dev Community, had a podcast about being a parent in tech for a few years, which is still up and a fun listen. And I love helping people have better conversations because the core of all the work that I do is really helping people work through those pain points and through those issues that they're facing by getting the work done or getting through that point in ways that are really fun and engaging. Much of what's written about meetings gives you those starter suggestions, right? They're things like have an agenda, think about who's invited, think about the cadence of the meetings, how long they are and how frequent. And all of those things are important, but that's where it starts, right? Running a meeting, especially a technical one, is so much more than that. 71% of senior managers believe that meetings are inefficient. How workers feel about the effectiveness of meetings correlates directly with their general satisfaction or dissatisfaction with their job. Almost 40% of employees consider unproductive meetings to be the highest cost to their organizations. 62% say that most meetings miss opportunities to actually bring the team closer together. And only half of all meetings are effective, well-used, and engaging. And those numbers drop even lower when it comes to remote meetings. But meetings are necessary. right? Especially the ones where we're talking about technical approaches, feasibility, postmortems, premortems, next steps. So folks could shout out a couple of reasons why your last technical meeting was helpful. Clarity?
Relevant.
What was that? Relevant? Clear agenda? Right people in the room? Managed. Awesome. Okay. Here are some of mine. More brains are better than fewer, right? More people, or 2 brains are better than 1. Other reasons why meetings are helpful: people can build upon each other's approaches. It can be a really important tool for teaching and learning and knowledge sharing. And it decreases the lottery factor, right? What happens if someone wins the lottery and leaves tomorrow? Different than the bus factor. I like the lottery better. Who else knows about that part of the code base? And these skills are really critical to career growth. As you grow more in seniority, you're doing this kind of stuff a lot more, right? At some point, yes, you're shipping code, but you're also unblocking others, solving the gnarliest problems that your company is seeing, creating alignment, getting people on the same page, right? When engineers come to me about that next promotion or trying to figure out where and how they can level up, this is that primary growth edge that I see. So how many people, I'm assuming there's a lot of people in the room, but how many people here have led a technical conversation to run path forward, new feature, functionality, et cetera? Yeah, lots of folks. What would people say about the last meeting that you ran? Would they say it was really informative? There were a lot of rabbit holes and tangents. It was a lot of the same people talking. It was really interesting. It was pretty chaotic. It was super inclusive. It didn't end with any action items or next steps. And these conversations are usually frontal, right? You share your screen, you talk through an idea, you ask for comments or feedback, maybe you provide a pre-read. Sometimes people even actually read that pre-read. But did you know that employees multitask in at least 41% of meetings that they're in? You are potentially multitasking right now. Right? And we know that especially for remote meetings, distributed teams, we're always fighting against dozens of other distractions. So what if all the reactions to your meetings could be things like, it was really engaging, I learned a lot, I had a chance to share my own approach, I felt really comfortable sharing, shared my opinion, and we walk through the current thinking. This is done through facilitating. So facilitation helps you meet your goals more effectively by actively engaging people in conversations and making them a part of what's going on. The first thing that I ask people when they come to me is, what are you trying to accomplish? What is the conversation that you want to have, and what do you want the outcome to be? Not just the agenda, not just some vague and nebulous goal, but how will people walk out of that meeting or that time together? Again, this goes beyond an agenda or an outline. It's the purpose. What do you want from people? And then tie everything about the structure of your meeting back to that purpose. What is an effective structure to reach that outcome? How will you ensure that people are following along with what you're saying? How will you get diverse opinions in the room, right? How will you limit that person who's always taking over the conversation from doing so? And how will you get that person who's really quiet, but you know has really good ideas, to be able to share their ideas? And how do you get the opinion of that person who always has one and always shares it, but shares it like way down the road when you're like, well, in order to address this, we gotta go 10 steps back, right? And then tell people that. I think sometimes we think about, okay, we know what the outcome is, we know what we want the purpose to be, but we forget to tell the people who are coming to our meetings that that's what the goal is. So for every meeting and for everything that you're doing, let people know what the purpose is and what those outcomes are so that they can mentally prepare themselves. It helps set expectations, which allows you to help keep that time focused and engaging. If everyone knows why they're at the meeting, when you go down rabbit holes or into these tangents, you can bring everyone back to that purpose. Okay, so approaches. There are two ways to think about making meetings really engaging and interesting to better accomplish your goals. The first are modalities, which is a fancy word for like exercises that you can do. And the second are instructions, or the framing, so how people have these conversations. So for modalities, I'm going to give you a couple of modalities or approaches that you can utilize with your groups. Okay. The first exercise that you can do is to have people think about different approaches to a problem. The goal here is a massive quantity of ideas, because you need a whole lot of bad ideas to figure out what the good ones are. So you can have people, like you can provide a technical approach first and have people play with that approach, asking a question like, how would you change this approach, or think about all the ways. You can also present a problem that you're trying to solve and have people brainstorm different solutions. Right? So these will have different levels of technical feasibility, and that's the point, because you want sort of all the ideas on the table. In order to help people think through these, you can give them prompts like this, which really sort of help push what they might normally come up with, or what they might come up with in those first 3 minutes of brainstorming, right? How do you get them beyond that? And you can also start these with a how might we framing of the problem. So how might we build X feature? How might we have resolved this incident faster? How might we make a certain part of our code base more stable and reliable? How might we give feedback to each other more effectively? Another option, if you're not looking to open up the conversation sort of quite that wide, is to present an approach and then have participants change one thing about it. So to change one thing really helps shape those constraints and narrows down what people are thinking. It allows for additional participation because that barrier to entry is lower, right? People don't have to feel like they have to come up with the perfect approach or solution. They don't feel like they have to understand your solution entirely in order to contribute to the conversation. They don't have to think through all of those complex risks and mitigations, or maybe even feel worried that they're bringing up stuff that you've already thought about. They can really just think about one aspect of the approach that they might change that would help improve the approach in some way, and can just explain that and explain why. These exercises and approaches are really important for a number of reasons that build on the success factors and the reasons we talked about earlier as to why we even have meetings, right? They give more ideas a chance. 30% of workers believe that their ideas are shut down far too quickly in meetings. They allow people to build on each other's ideas. They enable creativity, creative thinking, and solutioning, and they foster a deeper sense of curiosity and discovery. These are approaches that you start with, right? They get people engaging, talking, interacting with each other. And then you can add an exercise onto this that really starts narrowing down all of those ideas that you have on the table, right? What are the specific constraints that rule different ideas out? These are things like dot voting or other approaches that take that large set of inputs and really start sort of narrowing them down to what feels realistic and true and real, that gives you those next steps and those action items. So the other way to do this is through instructions, right? Instructions are how people participate in these modalities. Instructions and varied instructions are great for introverts, for neurodiverse folks, and just for greater engagement of everyone, right? You don't have to have all conversations in these full group, large discussions. By varying the instructions and the ways that folks are participating, not just what they're participating in, you're accommodating different personalities, different learning styles, and different thought processes to have a more inclusive atmosphere and ensure that everyone is being heard and considered. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Here's an example. When you're having people discuss a question or an approach, break it up into parts, right? First, tell people that they have a minute or two to sort of collect their own thoughts and jot some things down. Then have people get into pairs, then have 2 pairs get together into small groups of 4, and then have small groups discuss and maybe share back with the larger group, right? There's this progression that allows people to participate on a different level and makes your meetings more dynamic, more effective, and more efficient, because not everyone has to share everything in a large group. And you don't have to do all 4 of those steps or all 3 of those steps, right? You can have people in pairs and then back to the group and then back to the same pairs or different pairs. Maybe part of your meeting goal is to get more people to get to know each other, and so therefore you'll want to switch up the pairs. Or maybe you just break them up into small groups and they talk about the one thing. There is something as like a death by share back, which is when each small group then spends multiple minutes presenting back to the large group. That's also real tough. So, maybe say, okay, each small group, figure out the one concern, the one thing that you want to bring back to the larger group, and you have 1 minute, 3 sentences to sort of share that back. Okay, so I know there are probably a bunch of people in the room that are thinking about all the reasons this wouldn't work, or is like, man, this sounds a lot harder than just sharing my screen and presenting some information. And I mean, we're engineers, right? Part of what we do is think about all the ways that something can go wrong. And facilitating conversations can be really scary, right? You have to let in all of those different personalities that we talked about before. They're all part of the conversation. So here's how you can avoid some of the most common conversation pitfalls. First is by how people give feedback. So we talked a little bit about how might we's in terms of framing the questions for the discussion or for a conversation, but phrasing feedback through how might we statements, what are all the ways in which, or I'm curious about, can be really powerful. It can really help reframe, rephrase, and refocus what someone is asking. It feels more constructive. Now, I will warn you that when you first start doing this, it will feel very forced and very unnatural, and that's okay. But it really helps individuals be more succinct in their thoughts and figuring out what questions they actually want to ask, as opposed to just sort of word vomiting all over the meeting or cheat, right? They really have to figure out what is their how might we, what is their I'm curious about that helps them get that thought across. Next is knowing when to move on. So establish a parking lot and explain to everyone what the parking lot is at the beginning of the meeting. So this is the parking lot. When something comes up that we want to talk about more, but it doesn't fit into the purpose of this specific conversation, again, going back to your goals and outcomes, we're going to add it to the parking lot. And then we'll revisit the parking lot at blah, blah, blah. Pick a date, a time, figure out if it's gonna be synchronous, asynchronous, et cetera. I recommend not revisiting the parking lot in the same meeting. But in that way, you're focusing on your purpose and you're able to constantly bring folks back to that, but make sure that folks don't feel sort of written off or like what you brought up is gonna go into the ether and never be talked about again. Next are rabbit holes or tangents. So a parking lot can be one really successful way to deal with rabbit holes. The other thing that I do is by taking a kind of poll from the group. So after a few minutes, when it feels like a group probably has enough context on whatever the topic is, again, for the purposes of that specific conversation and its goals, but that conversation is continuing, you can ask the group for a thumbs up, thumbs down, or medium thumb on if you should continue the current conversation thread. So up is yes, down is no, middle is meh, I could go either way. The other way that I use this sometimes is when someone really wants to talk about something, but I am not sure if it actually will or won't add to the conversation and add to the purpose and the outcome of where we're trying to get to. So in that case, I'll time box it. I'll say something like, I'm gonna put 4 minutes on the clock for this conversation, and when the chimer chimes, I'd love for everyone to show me thumbs to see if we should move on or add a few more minutes to the clock for this thread. The next pitfall is when no one knows what's being talked about, but everyone is pretending that they do. So you can recognize this because there's often complete silence when people ask for questions. A good solution here, if you can, is to take like a 5-minute break and ask for questions to be sent to you anonymously. You can ask them for something like, send me something that you need clarity on, or let us know if we lost you at at some certain part. You can review those during the break, and then when folks get back, you can just sort of do a little bit of reset and be like, hey, there are a few things we need to clarify in terms of terms, approaches, questions, et cetera. If you can't do a break, like if it's a 30-minute or hour-long meeting and it doesn't make sense to do a 5-minute break, then if it's a meeting series, you can collect it in between meetings. But I will say one question that people commonly ask me is sort of like, when you know that people aren't following any longer, or when you can see like the eyes shifting and you know that people are doing a bunch of stuff, like what do you do in that moment? Because I think a lot of us tend to just power through that moment. Really, it's okay to call it out. It's okay to say like, hey, I feel like we've lost folks, or hey, it feels like folks are trying to take care of other important things. Let's take a 3-minute break. Shoot me questions, take care of whatever you need to take care of, and come back like ready to participate in the rest of this meeting. I think sometimes people are scared to just sort of like name it to tame it. And so that's also what you can do in this case. The next pitfall is meeting FOMO. You invite too many people to the meeting because otherwise people invent stories about what the meeting is accomplishing or what's being discussed, or it's seen as gatekeeping, and you don't want to do that. So you just add whoever wants or needs to be added. You add them as optional, but then a lot of people attend the meeting when it's either not actually the best use of their time, or it hinders actually getting to the meeting results. So ways to fix this: record the meeting. Provide summary notes. Now we have AI, so AI is great at being able to sort of record and provide some quick summary notes. You can also add different people to different sections of the meeting as they're relevant or valuable, right? So we're talking about this, I'm gonna add these people to this portion for these 10, 15 minutes. Then, these people to this portion for these 15 minutes sort of thing. Finally, the ultimate pitfall is having a lot of conversation, and maybe that conversation is really interesting and excellent and good, but you don't actually end with any action items or get to any sort of a conclusion. You have to get to some decisions. This is the part that so many meetings miss on. End with action items and next steps. When conversations seem to be going in different directions, you can try to recap. What I'm hearing is, or do we have any specific actions we want to take or decisions we want to put in front of everyone? My spicy hot take is that if a meeting doesn't end with action items and next steps, it shouldn't have been a meeting. So take a moment to think, one thing that I want to try in my next technical conversation is. One thing that I want to try in my next technical conversation is. Here's what I hope you try. I hope you try a new to you approach that encourages more participation. I hope that you try sitting in silence for a little bit longer than you're comfortable with. I hope you try developing your gut sense of when a conversation is on track or off track. And I hope that you try some new approaches to re-engaging people when you start to notice that they're obviously doing something else without calling them out, right? Because your goal is not to embarrass individuals, your goal is to engage them. So the next time that you feel like you're talking too much, you probably are, you can use some of these methods to allow others' ideas, opinions, thoughts, and reactions to surface. You won't regret it. You'll be developing your own facilitator superpowers. So I'd love to answer questions. I think we have a few minutes now, or you can find me in hallways. Today and tomorrow I look like this. I also, at least for most of tomorrow, will have a 10-year-old who's almost as tall as I am, who's very interested in talking to people, and a 7-year-old who is not interested in talking to anyone with me. So find me. And if these ideas sound interesting to you, but you're trying to figure out how to get more comfortable with them, or trying to figure out how they would work for your specific group or team, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to help. So I think we have time for a couple of questions if folks have any.
I got one.
Yeah.
So you just mentioned say you know that someone in the meeting knows the answer, but they're clearly distracted. What tactics do you use to not embarrass them in front of everybody?
Yeah. This is where you can do some meeting pre-work where you can say, like if you're expecting more participation or more leadership from somebody, you can sort of be like, beforehand, be like, hey, here's the agenda. I know that this is the part of the agenda that like I really need you to click in on to help answer some questions or to help people out, just so that they're aware, right? And so that so that they know what a lot of this is about setting expectations, right? You expect people to come to meetings, you expect people to pay attention in those meetings, you expect people to participate in those meetings. And so if you expect from somebody to participate more in certain parts or take the lead, like don't be afraid to just tell them that that's what the expectation is and why. I really think it'll help a whole bunch of people to hear this kind of thing from you. Yeah. Yeah.
What are some ways that you can help mitigate a technical leader who might go way down into rabbit holes and details that might not be productive for the whole team?
Yeah, is this a peer or someone that you report to? Like is it reporting chain or is it peer? Reporting chain, okay. I get this question very, very frequently, like how do you manage up with these like suggestions and ideas? So I think there's two things. One, if it's a meeting that like is just bad, right? People don't participate or most people that run meetings that aren't great know that their meetings aren't great, they just don't know what to do about it. So it's slightly different than what you're asking, but I would say like sometimes people are like, yeah, I have this meeting and it's like nobody talks and it's really awkward. And in that case, like I would say like just talk to your manager. Often they don't know what else to do. If it's somebody who sort of goes in the weeds or like is in that piece, sometimes it's worth exploring questions with them, like in a skip level or a one-on-one, like, hey, I know we have this meeting, and you like to get deep in the, I mean, a lot of leaders like just miss being that deep and they use those meetings as that avenue and outlet for that. But you could ask something like, what are you optimizing for, when you're asking these questions? Like, what is the information that you need to know? Is it personal interest? Is it like trying to show that you still have the tech chops for like credibility with the larger team? Is it because you're actually being asked things to this level of detail and like specificity that you do truly need to know like all of these in the weeds? And sometimes just asking them some of those questions or helping them realize like, hey, and when we go that deep in this area, it's hard for, if there are 10 people on the call, it's hard for everyone except for 2 people because that information isn't super relevant to them. How else can I get you that information? Should we do a one-on-one? Should we, whatever? That's often a really, like, understand what they're optimizing for and why they're going in that direction, and then how it's impacting the meeting or the individuals, and then what are alternative approaches or things that can be done instead. Now that involves some level of trust and how, like where they are in the reporting chain, et cetera, so fully recognize that, but that's what I'd suggest. Yeah. One more question? Last one, all right. Great, well, thank you all. I'm around, find me.